Welcome to the Cambridge Neuroscience Interdisciplinary Seminar Series. This series features current work from across the schools and departments of the University of Cambridge, reflecting the pioneering work and diverse interests of members of Cambridge Neuroscience. Cambridge Neuroscience is currently going through quite a detailed consultation process to develop 6 new themes for the research we do here. Each of the next 12 talks will come from one of the 6 new themes, 2 from each. For more info on the themes and the talks covered in this series, please follow the links below and follow us on Twitter at CamNeuro. Today we welcome Dr. Flavia Mancini, who will deliver a talk entitled Learning in Pain, Probabilistic Inference and Maladaptive Control. Flavia is a neuroscientist leading the NOx lab within the Computational and Biological Learning Research Unit at the Department of Engineering here at the University of Cambridge. Flavia combines behavioral, computational, and neuroimaging tools to understand pain perception and behaviour in humans. She trained at the University of Milan and University College London and is currently an MRC Career Development Award Fellow. Welcome, Flavia.
Well, thanks for inviting me today, and thanks to those attending the talk. So chronic pain is a major societal problem affecting 20% of the population worldwide and resulting in a huge economical cost related to disability and long-term care. Now, chronic pain also takes a dramatic toll on mental health, with 3 in 4 chronic pain patients reporting feeling of depression. So this is really, we're talking about really high numbers, more than what our healthcare system can deal with, pretty much. So this is huge. We urgently need effective and sustainable solutions to this growing problem, but there are no easy answers. And it is now recognized that solutions will require a multidimensional approach that tackles the different factors that mediate pain experience and behavior. So my group focuses on understanding how pain systems work in the human brain. And we try to understand how the brain interprets noxious signals from the body and generates pain perception and behavior. Now, the conventional approach to this problem involves mapping pain and brain activity. Now, this approach has laid the foundations of our understanding of human pain processing of noxious inputs, which remains decades behind other sensory systems, such as vision. So we're going to present you, can sound like basic, but because we really almost don't have the foundations. So for instance, we characterized the distribution of spatial acuity across the body. And 150 years later, it was done for touch. And spatial acuity for pain is completely independent on the spatial acuity for pain. And you might, for example, be familiar with this textbook representation of the homunculus in the primary somatosensory cortex, but this has been done for touch, not actually for pain. So if you stimulate the primary somatosensory cortex, you don't elicit a pain sensation. However, the region can encode pain sensations, but there was the idea that it was just widespread across S1 without a specific somatotopic organization. And instead, we found that nociceptive input, which is A delta, to the digits is finally mapped in primary somatosensory cortex. So here different colors represent different stimulations in different fingers. And we found a map of the digits for pain input well aligned with the map of tactile input that was nearly 10 years ago. And why this is relevant is because there is this widespread belief that these sensory maps of pain and also for touch may be maladaptively reorganized in a number of chronic pain conditions, and specifically complex regional pain syndrome, which is a very severe type of chronic pain. And using this approach, we actually found, we measured directly how the hand map was, you can't see the titles here, can you? Can you see the titles?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Apologies. And we found that the area, location, and especially internal organization of the hand map is actually well preserved in chronic CRPS, and this challenges the rationale for common interventions that try to restore S1 organizations, such as using mirror box illusions or tactile discrimination training. Now, colleagues in US have also found fine-grained signatures of pain intensity across the brain. Again, remember that no single region in isolation can elicit pain, but pain seems to be derived by the concerted activity of many brain regions. But what each of these processing nodes is doing is unclear. So we need many regions to elicit pain sensation. Why many? What each of the nodes is doing, what is their functional role, that is actually not understood. And in the past couple of decades, there have been a real explosions of cross-sectional studies mapping differences in brain structure and function in chronic pain condition. What I'm showing here is one of the very few longitudinal brain imaging studies reporting that connectivity between the nucleus accumbens and the menial prefrontal cortex is predictive of the transition to chronic back pain. Now, all of this is very important, especially because obviously it's relevant. It's tied to, those are predictors of the transition to chronic back pain. And the more we can predict this transition, the better, because hopefully we can try to stop people from sliding into chronicity. But the problem is understanding what these results actually mean. So for example, it's not clear, do we know what is the function that this connectivity mediates? And actually the answer is no, we don't. Now the brain is actually a computing machine, and so we can ask, so what are these regions computing? Why this connectivity, but there are also other findings in other studies, are predictive of chronic pain? And the problem that I can see is that if we just use a conventional mapping approach, we cannot answer these questions. For example, it has been proposed that abnormalities, these abnormalities that I've shown you, might reflect maladaptive emotional learning, but this is based on reverse inference rather than direct scientific evidence. So personally, I feel that if we continue taking a conventional mapping approach, which I also took in the past, we reach a dead end where the results of functional structural brain changes in chronic pain are not interpretable because the studies were not sufficiently constrained. So I am taking now a different road, a different direction. So my approach now is a computational approach that links neural activity with pain perception and behavior using mathematical models of information processing. So it's a principled approach. And this is actually, it's a minority view in the pain field, but it's actually quite mainstream in other fields. So it's becoming mainstream in other fields, such as computational psychiatry or other fields of sensory neuroscience. And in the pain field, we have actually really few taking this perspective. Now I will call back David Marr's theoretical framework to define the scope of our thinking and our work. Now, following David Marr's theoretical framework, we can distinguish three main levels of analysis. First, at computational levels, we can think about what ecological problems did pain evolve to solve. At algorithmic level, we can think about how is the problem represented and solved. At an implementational level, we can think about how is the solution physically realized by the pain system. Now, the answer to the first question is actually not trivial. So in the acute, if you consider the healthy state where pain is rather, it's not very long lasting, it tends to pass when its causes are resolved. The main function of pain is to minimize harm. So, and this involves two separate subfunctions. One is detecting and predicting threats, and the other is to controlling action, ideally in an optimal way, in an adaptive way. However, when pain persists for long periods of time, it might lose its adaptive link to survival. This is a common belief, is that pain could become maladaptive. Again, the fact that it's maladaptive is not has not been actually fully demonstrated yet. And some of the learning changes might actually be adaptive and compensatory to help coping with pain. Now, we'll get back to this point later in my talk, but at the moment, we're just focusing on the healthy adaptive system. Now, the detection and prediction of threats could be explained or modeled by current theoretical account of information processing based on Bayesian inference. Now, according to this view, we do not have direct access to the causes of our sensations, and therefore we infer them based on prior knowledges, so expectations in orange, as well as current sensory evidence, so the reality, the likelihood. And we can combine these two probability distribution using Bayesian rule. And this derives, and from this we can derive an inference. For example, how much pain do I feel right now? Now, there is actually ample evidence that expectations modulate pain perception. So, for example, think about the placebo effect, or the less known nocebo effect, which is directly the opposite. So placebo, if you know that you're going to get relief from, for example, a pill, even if it's just sugar, you might actually feel less pain. And nocebo, you might actually get side effects because these are amplified by the expectations. So there is certainly ample evidence that expectations can actually shift and modulate pain perception, but this is not actually studied in a Bayesian framework, and the very few studies that look at it from a Bayesian point of view, they actually yielded controversial results. So it's still not clear, for example, whether the uncertainty of the prior modulates pain intensity as predicted by the Bayesian framework. So this is really an open area of research where there is quite a lot of room for developing new studies. But actually, we should think back at the question. So is the question, how much pain do you feel right now, the right question to ask? Is this the important question to ask? Or rather, what matters is how pain changes over time. Because, you know, the present is elusive. What matters really is the future. What matters is how I'm going to feel in a minute, in an hour, tomorrow, in a few months, in a few years. This is what matters. Because I can't change what happened to me so far, but I can change what happens to me from now on. So I think that the right person the question that matters the most for Bayesian, for pain inference, is how pain is going to change over time, because pain, we know it can persist for long periods of time, and it does change, it just fluctuates a lot. So think about when you had, I don't know, a headache or a back pain or any kind of, well, I can also say postpartum type of pain or things like that. It does change. It does change a lot. So this is the question I'm actually focusing on in my MRC fellowship, is to understand how does the brain learn to infer how pain changes over time based on how it has changed in the past. And this type of learning is generally called temporal statistical learning. So there has been a lot of work on temporal statistical learning in other sensory systems, such as vision and audition. There's a lot of work in Cambridge done by in Zoe Kurzi group. But actually no work at all within the pain system. So why does it matter? What is so special about pain TSL? I think the reason why it's actually really important is that potentially TSL, which temporal statistical learning, which we know is actually nearly ubiquitous to the way the brain works. So the brain is tuned to extract regularities from streams of sensory signals it receives. We are always looking for meaning. We're always learning from patterns. That's what we do. And we learn patterns to predict what will happen next. And so learning patterns, learning how pain changes in time to predict what will happen next could be used by the central nervous system as a to generate endogenous predictions, endogenous expectations that will help the central nervous system to regulate its responses to forthcoming pain signals and to regulate behavior. And this is because fundamentally the brain uses pain signal as both aversive learning and control signals for survival. So this is really why it's setting pain aside from all other sensory systems. So we have a system that provides learning input as well as control all at the same time. Opportunity for control all at the same time. And potentially, obviously, control could engage descending pain modulatory pathways that have been well characterized to be engaged and up and down regulated by expectations in the well-known placebo and nocebo effects. So ideally, they should actually act probably in a similar way. That's the working hypothesis. So I'm not going to give you an answer to all of this because, you know, I'm at the beginning of the fellowship and also just coming out on maternity leave as well. So I will probably give you more answer in the year to come, but I just want to give you a preview of what we're working on and the preliminary results we have. So again, we are basically applying a Bayesian framework to predictive temporal inference, where the key question is how does pain evolve over time? So the post-zero is actually for us tracking temporal inferences.
At this point in the seminar, Flavia discussed some unpublished data that is not presented here.
So going back to my main question was what ecological problems pain evolved to solve. So inference was one, but the other one was obviously controlling action, because we can be very good at inferring forthcoming pain, but if we don't do anything about it, that's not very useful. So this field of work is much better studied and characterized than based on inference for pain, because basically it's largely we can refer to the vast reinforcement learning literature, and actually pain is one type of punishment, but the aversive learning systems that are involved in controlling pain-related actions are actually probably largely overlapping to those of any other punishment, and so we can and these actually have been well characterized. For example, temporal difference learning rules that are used to minimize pain engage are actually we can see the prediction error, for example, is encoded in the brainstem, in the periaqueductal gray, in the PAG. So there is a neural counterpart that we discuss in this review. And for a more comprehensive characterization of the different Pavlovian and instrumental learning systems, as well as model-based systems that might be involved in pain control, I refer to this review in Neuron published by Ben Seymour in 2019.
At this point in the seminar, Flavia discussed some unpublished data that is not presented here.
So just to wrap up, again, going back to our theoretical framework, I have proposed to take a computational computational neuroscience approach to bridge the gap between noxious inputs and outputs, pain perceptions and behavior. So at computational level, this means thinking about how the pain systems minimize harm by detecting and predicting threats and controlling actions. At algorithmic levels, this seems to be able to be achieved at least partially using Bayesian inference and value-based learning. Now, what we don't know is if any of these processes go, any of the Bayesian inference processes go wrong in chronic pain. This has never been investigated before. We see some initial differences in value-based learning, but we don't know yet whether these are adaptive or maladaptive. So we need to do more work on it. Personally, my vision would be to develop a toolkit of very simple learning tasks that can be distributed pretty much widely, so we can start testing learning in a principled way in large groups of patients. So we can start actually having some we can start looking whether learning can predict whether it can either hinder or facilitate the progression to chronic pain in actual patients. And another thing from a more scientific point of view is to understand how Bayesian inference systems and value-based learning systems interact with each other, because these are probably implemented as parallel processing streams that they must interact somehow. We propose some candidates for interactions in the regions highlighted here in purple. I'm showing regions that we know are involved in sensory processing for pain in red, regions that we know are involved in value-based learning or representations in blue. And so the issues are how these two parallel streams talk to each other. They might talk through the regions shown in purple. This is yet not known, and is something we are working on. Again, one of the advantages of this approach is that this could be used to quantify abnormalities in information processing and cognitive learning at specific processing levels, and then we could use it to link it to the underlying neural functions. So I would like to conclude with an appeal. So we are always looking for people with lived experience to give feedback and contribute to the design of our studies. So here is the link on how to join our community. It's all done online. And we are also opening positions over the next probably couple of weeks for postdocs and research assistants with neuroimaging and computational skills to come and join us. Thanks everyone, thanks people working the group and all the collaborators, and especially Ben Seymour and Sue Zhang in Oxford. Thanks to the funders, MRC, funding my current work on temporal statistical learning versus arthritis, who funded they funded the work on rheumatoid arthritis I just presented. And thanks for attending.
Thank you, Flavia, for that fascinating talk and insight into your work. Join us next week when we welcome Professor Gordon Harold from the Faculty of Education at Cambridge. Gordon is the inaugural Professor of the Psychology of Education and Mental Health here at the university. He will be speaking to us on unpacking nature from nurture, understanding how family processes affect child and adolescent mental health. For more info on this seminar series and all things neuro-related in Cambridge, follow us on Twitter at CamNeuro and follow the links below. See you next time.